on to the Eagles. And Mason is not able to be here today, but either way, very important that we have Ben Winkelman back here today to speak on Eagles. Ben was the snake charmer a couple years ago, if you remember that, when we had the live snakes. Yeah, by popular demand, Ben and Sarah, we appreciated that and welcome you back. And for those that don't know, Ben Winkelman is the director of the Rome-Floyd Eco Center, and he is going to talk to us about the bald eagle comeback in the southeast U.S., as well as the bald and gold eagle restoration efforts. And also, he's handled that as part of his time as a wildlife biologist with Georgia Department of Natural Resources. So from participating in aerial surveys to working in hacking towers, right? And he'll explain what that is. Ben had a front row seat to eagle restorations all over in Georgia. His and this unique and knowledgeable perspective and grounds himself and presentation in history while looking at the present and the future of eagles. So if you will welcome Ben, and I will get his presentation up and ready.
In Saturday fun. One thing I want to add very quickly, if you do see any wild hogs or piglets, green light them, run them over. Just run them right over. And I'm sorry, I know that's kind of, but wild pigs here in Georgia are not, they're not wildlife. They're an invasive species that came from Spain, not even part of the North American continent. And we think DeSoto brought them over many, many years ago, and it creates a lot of, it's like any invasive species that gets here, from all the way down to the coastal Georgia, from them rooting up and eating sea turtle eggs, all the way up to the mountains of how they impact the acorn crop every year that supports deer and turkeys and all the other things. Hogs do play a very devastating part in that, and a lot of folks just, I don't think sometimes they realize it, but a wild hog, a female, is sexually mature in 6 months of age. They also cycle around, and each sow is able to produce about 30 piglets in theory a year. They can breed 3 different cycles, raise 3 different litters in a 12-month period, up to 8 to 10 piglets apiece. So you can see how quickly it becomes a problem. So I say that jokingly. Please don't tear up your car and say, well, that snake man told me to. Please don't do that. But sometimes in the world of wildlife management, whether it's eagles or wild turkeys or bobwhite quail or whatever it is, sometimes what we do is not pretty, right? Sometimes we have to trap. Sometimes we have to manage species. And I get that question a lot of, man, if you love deer so much, why are you going out and harvesting all these for different reasons? Well, you're right. I do love wildlife so much that sometimes if it's EHD or heaven forbid we see chronic waste in this part of the state, that we have to do some different management things. So sometimes in the wildlife management world, it's not always pretty, unfortunate. You know, sometimes there's things that have to be done that quite personally I don't care to do. You know, I was raised, if you harvest an animal, you consume and eat it. So we do have that mindset. But we're not here today to talk about all the different things that we deal with in the state of Georgia. We're here to talk about bald eagles. And at a very young age, I got exposed to an incredible wildlife biologist, ecologist, Ted Touchstone, that was instrumental in working with the golden and bald eagles here in the state of Georgia. And I was very young, but he kind of took me under his wing and taught, and I was able to learn right under him, and took a lot of time, and it was a great opportunity that I had to be able to work with him. Now, in Georgia, well, good news and bad news. The good news is I wasn't going to really use a PowerPoint anyway. It just helps me stay focused, because a lot of times I'll see something shiny and kind of wander off and get on another topic. And I look at Sarah, and Sarah's my work wife, and she'll look at me and go, come on. You're talking about wild hogs too much. Move on. So The PowerPoint is just to kind of keep me focused, but I don't really use them a whole lot anyway, which is the good news. The bad news is the one that I prepared, I couldn't pull up on my OneDrive, and I brought my computer, I brought a thumb drive, I brought everything as a backup to a backup, and guess what? I still messed it up. So anyway, so let's talk about what we're here to talk about. I am truly impressed on what you guys do here at Bent Creek. From everything I've heard about the pollinators and warm season native grasses and how you treat wildlife. It's so refreshing to me because all of a sudden I'm thinking, man, all this urban sprawl and development, we can actually live right in the middle of wild places and still be passionate about managing wildlife and what we're doing and for the greater good. And it also reminds us just how adaptive wildlife can be, right? Because you guys are living right here among wild turkeys, bear, and deer, and everything else, and seem to be doing good and thriving. So it's like, God, I wish every community thought about Adopt a Stream and all the different things that you guys are doing. So it truly is a pleasure to come up and visit this morning with some like-minded folks. So we are definitely thankful to be here yet again, and hope to come back and we'll pick another animal to talk about here in Georgia. But of course, we know that the national emblem of our great United States of America is the bald eagle. You know, Ben Franklin, what animal did Ben Franklin want as our nation's symbol? The wild. Sorry. Sorry. I get excited when we talk about wild turkeys. But of course, Ben Franklin wanted the wild turkey because his idea of the bald eagle was, man, that eagle's a thief. You know, that eagle an osprey will catch a fish and he'll fly off with it, and the eagle won't hunt much. He'll go steal that fish from that osprey. Well, hey, you can't blame him for being smarter than another guy. He just lets him work his tail off and then goes and capitalizes on it. So we see that kind of thing, but that was Ben Franklin's deal with the eagle. But of course, the majestic bald eagle became our nation's emblem. And there's a line in here that we think where it actually came from. So back all the way to the late 1700s, our founding fathers had viewed the bald eagle as courageous, strong, independent. Late 1700s, it was believed that the bald eagle's range was strictly North America. And upon recovering Europeans' journals and entries from early settlers, private the colonies, they just thought that bird was here in North America. But legend has it that the large bird with a white head that was spotted flying, this is where we think the idea came from of it being our nation's emblem, was during the Revolutionary War battlefield in the early morning's hour out on a battlefield. The history says that there was a piercing cry of a bald eagle that was flying over that battlefield. And of course, they kind of locked it in as calling to arms of freedom or the sound of freedom. So that's kind of initially where that thought came from, of that bird actually flying over a battlefield, and that's kind of where it came from. And then, of course, our independence in 1776, 250 years later, and then in 1782, we adopted it as the Great Seal of the United States of America. Now, as we move forward through history, 1940, we began to see the Bald Eagle Protection Act that protected the bald eagle, its young, the nest, the tree. Those were laws that were enacted to help protect some of these birds of prey. The first law, as you might have heard of as early as the 1900s, was the Lacey Act, right? We learned in the early 1900s from early settlers coming in that conservation wasn't a big thing. It was with Native American culture, right? The Indians that were here prior to the early settlers understood and knew they could harvest a bull elk or they could harvest a buck deer, but they left the females alone, right? Because they knew that was money in the bank. That was food in the grocery store, that they could continue to have that resource. So they were more conservation in tune with nature. When the early settlers got here, their journals said, oh, the fields were just black with wild turkeys. There's just hundreds and hundreds upon hundreds. And then the early settler says, man, these birds are delicious, right? And then they began to not only harvest the males, the gobblers, but they took the hens as well. And then all of a sudden becomes that issue that we all see, that monetary value. And that changed everything, right? We began to see commercial hunting, large amounts of these birds, waterfowl, deer, all these things being harvested for a monetary value, right? And then, of course, conservation went to the back door because there was money involved. You know, the mindset of very quickly what happens is if there's a value on that, a monetary value, we're not worried about what's happening in the future. We're worried about getting paid today. And that's kind of what we've seen with the conservation just kind of went out the window with commercial hunting and so forth. So as early as 1900, we saw the Lacey Act come to fruition that protected the sale and the trade and all this and the possession of some of these wildlife parks. But then later on in 1940, of course, the Bald Eagle Protection Act came to be that specifically was more specific to the bald eagle and then birds of prey. So in 1940, the Eagle Act, it protects bald eagle, the young, the nest, so forth. And then we had, of course, the additional federal protection with the migratory bird and the Lacey Act that was part of it. And of course, a lot of people don't, when they think about migratory birds, what's the first bird you think about? Geese. Oh my gosh. Yep. So we see those geese. I got kicked out of 2 libraries in high school for making animal noises. True story. But we think about geese. Sometimes we don't think about birds of prey, right? But when we think about bald eagles and golden eagles, they are migratory birds. A lot of times they'll reside somewhere else and then they'll kind of feed. They may have different feeding grounds and then they may nest in another location, but technically they are a migratory bird. And what dictates migration is food source, right? Those geese, now we see we've got more migratory geese and are not less migratory and more resident birds here, right? Because there's no need for them to move anywhere. What drives migratory is typically food source and weather temperature. But we see the geese that are here, and of course they're a good food for geese, but we don't sometimes think about these guys as migratory. 1960s in North America, we think there was probably maybe around 400 nesting pairs, all right, just throughout our nation. And then in 1970, only one successful nest was known in Georgia, down on the coast. So we saw this once, like it says, a prolific bird in abundance, but now was on the brink of extinction. The rest of our nation's states also suffered a drastic decline. 1974, the bald eagle was added to Georgia's protected species list as endangered species. So now we'll talk about the drastic decline. In terms of conservation, when we think about genetics, populations bouncing back, 1974 to today, 50 some odd years, that's a blip when you talk about wildlife populations, right? That's not very long at all. When we think about something rebounding from the brink of extinction to a healthy population, 50 years is a pretty short time, right? So that's kind of amazing inside itself when you think about how populations recover. Restoration begins. Now here's starting some of the cool stuff. In 1978, active nests found on Georgia's coast. 1981, total of about 2 active nests that they knew about in Georgia. And then of course 1995, we began, and the Georgia DNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife began to obtain captive breeding facilities and started pushing for the restoration. Now, the demise of eagles, bald eagles, golden eagles, and probably some other birds of prey, of course, was pesticides. We've all heard about DDT, right? One of the effects of DDT was making the eagles, it wasn't potent enough to kill the eagle right off the bat through ingestation. But the effects of the DDT chemical and pesticides, where it would make the shell itself incredibly thin, and then of course when that eagle would lay her eggs, usually her just incubating those embryos, those small eggs, she would crush them, right? So that's the demise of that DDT. Now, we know that when we would spray pesticides on the crops, it would of course kill bugs and all the things that we fight as a pesticide. But you can't bush hog a field or mow a hay field without see field mice running everywhere, right? So we know that those mice would ingest the seed and so forth. And then as succession goes with those in their diet, an eagle would consume and eat them. Because think about this way. When we talk about predator-prey relationships, it takes the fastest, coolest, most cunning predator to catch the slowest, lame prey item, right? So if I'm an eagle and I'm flying over a field and I see a souped-up field rat, and he can sprint, and he can run, and he can dart and zig and zag, am I going to go after that one? Or I got the one that's got a belly full of pesticides, and he don't feel well, he's bumping into stuff, he's running and falling over, and he's not, no, he's easy pickings, right? So just by nature, those eagles are hammering and feeding on the ones that are lame. I mean, it's just how nature works, right? Usually the slow ones, the ones that are injured or something like that, unfortunately are in that food web are going to get consumed first, right? So that was the big thing. That's why so many eagles were ingesting mice and different things like that had the DDT. So once they figured out that the DDT and pesticides was a problem, it began to be outlawed, changed, all those different things to kind of help combat the effects of what was going on with eagles and other birds of prey, right? So the restoration, that was kind of the problem with the eagles. Everybody says, a lot of people say when you first think of it, it's habitat destruction. That's an easy answer, right? That's the easy thing. We can say, what happened to bobwhite quail? Habitat destruction. Well, what happened to this? Well, habitat destruction. That's just kind of, in my opinion, that's just kind of a blanket what we say. But a lot of times, more than not, there's a lot more to it than that, right? And we could see how pesticides was playing such a huge role in that time period in affecting those eagles. So there are some cool things that happen. When we talk about captive breeding facilities and wild nests in the states where birds were more plentiful, so how did we get eagles back? There was an idea from incredibly way more talented, brilliant biologists many years ago. By studying eagles, we knew that eagles were a lot different than any other bird. We know that wild turkey, or even quail, most other birds, when they lay a clutch of eggs, right, wild turkey will lay 8, 10, 12, sometimes as many as 14 eggs in a clutch of eggs, right? Now that wild turkey, she doesn't lay all those in a day or two. She lays 1 egg a day for ever how many eggs she has, right? So that wild turkey, that hen, she will nest on the ground. She'll lay an egg a day for ever how many eggs she's going to produce, 8, 10, 12, whatever. The last day, when that last egg is hatched, she begins to sit, right? So we can say that an egg in that nest is a day old, right? And then there's also eggs in there that could be 8, 10, 12 days old, right? Well, incubation occurs at the same time, which means after 28 days, they all hatch within hours of each other, right? Kind of like chickens, right? Within hours, they're all picking, you know, they all start peeping back and forth, and they start pipping those eggs. And usually within 24 hours, they hear each other, they'll pick, and they all hatch pretty much together, right? Eagles do not do that. For whatever reasons beyond us, the eagles don't do that. We know that eagles will lay 1, 2, sometimes 3 eggs, more commonly 2, right? So the mom eagle's nesting, she lays an egg. She incubates that egg immediately, okay? 5 to 7 days later, she lays the second egg, continues to incubate. So what happens in 32 plus or minus days, sometimes as many as 36 days, right? We have two different hatch times. Since incubation started at 2 different times, now we've got 2 different hatch times. So now, and a lot of you guys may know this by reading about eagles, so now we know that after this time period, we have an eaglet that hatches. He's out. He's had a successful hatch, and he's in there. And then about 5 to 7 days later, the second one hatches. Well, in the eagle world, 5 to 7 days is a huge period of time, right? The second eagle, and during this time period, during the wild nest, was usually 100% mortality, because the mother was not healthy, right? She was still struggling with DDT and some of these other effects genetically. And when her body produced those 2 eagles, she was healthy enough to hunt and provide for one, essentially. So she would concentrate all her efforts on that firstborn. The second one, more times than not, was an insurance policy that was just about 100% mortality, right? He was 5 days late. When he hatched out, she's got this, the first eagle she hatched has got all the downy feathers, and he's staying warm, and he started to eat, and he started to feed, and he's going doing all these things, and then this other one hatches, almost featherless, slimy, just come out of a deal, weak, right? And she just pretty much, just by virtue, would concentrate all her efforts on that first one. So you saw this mortality, huge mortality, almost 100% with the second born. So there was an idea that what if biologists or wildlife conservationists could get to that second egg that always dies anyway, right? So here we go. Now, when these eagles move in early fall, start nesting, start building their nest, start taking care of their nest site, and then later on, breeding, of course, laying eggs. Typically 2 flights are made throughout the state of Georgia. They would fly maybe sometime in the fall to see these eagles hopefully on a nest, right, together, because the male and female will kind of set back and forth. They would fly, and once they located some of these nesting sites with the eagles actually on them, they were marked, of course, and then they would send a team of biologists in to ascend up the tree, up the side of a mountain, wherever it was at, and take and steal that second egg, right? Now, sometimes we've all been to grocery stores, we've all been to Walmart at some point in time of our life. You can go through one of those stores and shop, and you can figure out, that's a pretty good mom right there, And then there may be another lady there, and you go, lady, get your kids. They're just, all over the place. True story, right? My mother had a switch. I didn't touch nothing. If you touch that, we got to pay for it. Yes, ma'am. And eagles were a lot the same way. Some of them, when biologists would approach the nest, take the egg, put it in a special container, and lower it down, and take that egg. Some of the moms were, whatever. And then some were, "Wah!" It was game on. You see pictures of guys with football helmets up in the nest, and, trying to steal an egg from a bird that's got a 7 to 8 foot wingspan. In the eagle world, we know, since she's the egg layer, her body's bigger. It's almost 2/3 bigger than the male. So she's a pretty big bird, 7, 8 foot wingspan, and the talons and so forth. So that could be tricky. And most of the time, that all of this happens 75 to 100 feet off the ground, right? Up there with ascending gear ropes and climbing gear to obtain that egg. Now, after the egg was incubated by people, and these birds hatched out, that's Ted Touchstone actually out in Wyoming. That's a golden eagle nest there on the right that he was stealing one of the eggs from. You can see a little bit of climbing gear, but OSHA was not a big thing back in the day. So he had a leg harness on, but that's, anyway, so. Hacking tower. We call this process, when we talk about a hacking tower or hacking out one of these birds of prey, it's a process of, the whole idea is to release these birds without them being imprinted on humans, right? And I think as we go back and look, and the things I'd also learned from working with Ted was bald eagles are very intelligent. It doesn't take but 1 or 2 times to imprint that bird for good, right? They're so intelligent that if you go up those stairs and you introduce a deer hindquarter to that eagle, that eaglet, 1 or 2 times he now knows that upright walking thing provides food for me. Then what happens if that bird gets released and he sees humans? He's going to that human for food source, right? And that puts him in places like grocery store parking lots, around power lines, around things that he don't need to be flying around, right? So the idea of these hacking towers is sometimes they were fed at night. Sometimes it was under ghillie suits that covered in camouflage, where it looks like, oh, that bush just dropped out a deer leg, you know. So I don't know what who knows what they were thinking, but the whole point is not to imprint those birds, because they were going to the wild, right? So these hacking towers, after the eagles hatched out of the egg from an incubator, they were put into these hacking towers and fed and monitored until they were fledgling size and ready to take their first flight, right? So during that process, one of the things they discovered with this is they went up during daylight hours and they opened the doors to these hacking towers, and the eaglet that was fixing to fledge stepped out on the, we'll say, porch and flew off. And he understood that he had been in an enclosure. Well, that was not a good thing. They wanted that area to be as safe as a nesting site as it could become, right? So what they figured out is if they opened those doors during the night, when that eagle was either roosting or semi-asleep or supposed to be sleeping, there was not the reaction of a bolting out of an enclosure or a cage, right? So what would happen is at night, when they were fledgling size, getting ready to fly, they would open the doors. At that next morning, the sun would come up and the bird would, this is cool. You know, sometimes it would sit in there for hours before it even think about flying. It never started making the connection that, oh, I've been in a cage this whole time, right? So that was one way to kind of combat that. So the other thing on the backside of that they learned is those birds would come back sometimes. If those birds were released in that area, they would come back to that hacking tower when they were 2 or 3 years old, because it was a safe place. That was their nesting site. That's where they were reared and raised. That's where they fledged at. So they were coming back to visit that area. So that was all winning points there, right? So that's the process of hacking or hacking tower is raising an animal to the point where it's never imprinted and then returned back into the wild. Eagles do not know how to fly, right? And what I mean by that is they learn. They just don't taxi down the runway and graceful and fly away. That's not how that happens, right? It's a leap of faith. They come out on the edge of that hacking tower, wind's coming by. Sometimes they may stay in that thing for several days before they take their first flight. A lot of times on windy days, you'll see them kind of stretch those wings out, and they're like, oh, they're getting close. They're starting to figure it out, and sometimes they would hop around and get on top of the house or whatever until they took that first flight. And it is a leap of faith. The other thing they don't know how to do after they achieve flight, they don't know how to land, right? So it was always very unique. I was present with Ted on a couple occasions to where it was, you were worried about the bird, but it was pretty comical because they would come back from flying and you're like, God, this is the coolest thing ever. I was standing here, red-blooded American, and watched this eagle take its very first flight. And that was just always so cool, right? But he would come into land and the coolness just wore off because, he's coming in trying to land and you got wind currents. If you've ever been on Pigeon Mountain, if you've ever been at Lake Altoona, it's always windy. It's like South Dakota. There's always a wind up there, no matter what, right? And it's crosswinds and everything else. So this bird, majestic, beautiful creature, is taking his first flight. Is right rudder, left rudder, right rudder. Whew. And more times than not, he would hit that hacking tower and roll over and like, I made it, I made it. I made it. So a lot of it was kind of comical to watch this over the years on how these birds and what all they face without human interaction, all the things that they have to do to be surviving healthy, learning to fly, landing, hunting, all these different things. So it's always very, very unique and interesting to me. These, of course, are juvenile bald eagles. They don't get the white head, tail fan. Sometimes they'll start marbling up as quick as 3 years, but usually by 4 and 5, by 5 they've got the big white tail fan, of course, and then the white head. And here's the adults that are flying. So this is, I did update this for 2026, but in 2020, and we're still kind of that, we're way over this now. We think we're probably maybe a little bit closer to about 275 active nests in the state. Future trends continue to look very good. We're seeing when these guys are flying every year, they took a break during COVID, but they're back flying 2 different routes a year, monitoring all the eagle nests throughout the state, still doing that. The program's still in existence. And we think in 2026, they're getting about, or seeing about 80% of success in hatching, which is pretty good. If you've ever raised any kind of birds, if you're getting 80% of pliable hatchlings that are doing well, that's pretty big. So between DDT being outlawed, definitely more education. You know, hey, Junior, I know that thing's stealing your chickens, but don't shoot the big bird with the white head, right? You've got the Lacey Act, you've got all these different, the endangered species. There's a lot more information out there about, hey, that's the bird of prey, and of course now, as time goes on, the bald eagle, everybody has seen and knows kind of the bald eagle. And golden. This is a great friend of mine, bless his heart. He passed away in 2010, but and when you go to our facility at the Eco Center, and I'll try to bring that up later, I've got, and there's 3 words, it happens, these 3 words happen in a lot of places I go, and I can kind of see it here. Those words, when you walk into our big foyer, on the words, there's 3 words. It says leadership, stewardship, and legacy. And one thing when I was in that chair and I was thinking about that, as you guys live here and in the mountains and Bent Creek and so forth, of how cool it is that you've got good leadership. At some point in time, somebody said, "Hey, man, we need to focus on wildlife. We need to focus on our streams. We need to focus on what we have here." So there's good leadership. There's also stewardship. Your guys are out there working on creeks. Creek bank, restoration. You're working on pollinators. You're working on that. And then, of course, at the end of that, you've got other people that may at some point live here. I mean, doom and gloom. This is a motivational speech. At some point, we're probably going to do like a bullfrog and croak, right? But the work you're doing here and the philosophy that you have here, whether you realize it or not, is leaving a legacy for others, right? There's going to be other people that's going to move into Bent Creek. There's going to be other people that's going to embrace that same element of leadership and stewardship and legacy that you guys have left behind. And it's so cool that when you talk about all the different programs that you guys are doing, you guys are carving out a pretty good legacy for this place. And that is pretty dang cool. I'm always impressed to come up here and talk to you guys. But that's Ted right there. And he kind of put that on me when we talk about legacy. Some of the things that we deal with bald eagles today in today's world. The bird on the right was a bird that I got out of the Etowah River years ago, and it actually went to Auburn University, was in their flight pen for about 6 months, and then they called us back and let us release it on Altoona. But that bird was found in the Etowah River, tangled up in fishing line. Fishing line is terrible, terrible. We see a lot of that. We see ospreys get tangled up in it. And what happened to this eagle, somebody was fishing, broke their line off, right? There was a dried piece of shad on a hook, had fishing line on it where the line had broke. That bird seen that fish, went and got it off the log, and of course got all tangled up and was basically tethered to that log. Didn't have any broken bones, but was bruised up really bad. But it was cool that was able to get to it and capture it. Yeah, it's always a funny story, There's like, well, how can we get to it? The only thing I have is a kayak paddle, and a towel. That's it, and a kayak, right? Wasn't even sure if it was an eagle or not, but sure enough, it was an eagle, so paddled upstream. It wasn't downstream, obviously, from the boat ramp. It was a mile upstream. Why would it be downstream? It's upstream. So, so catching this eagle, it's like the guy's like, what are you going to do? So, I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. So, threw the towel over this guy. And now this is a baby. He's not even a year old yet, all right? But he knows how to use his beak and he knows how to use his talons. So, throwing a towel over him and capturing the bird safely and have his feet controlled. And he's looking at me and I'm looking at him and I'm like, now what? I got him, but I'm not sure I want him. And now we got to paddle downstream and get him and me out of here. So anyway, I had some help. Guy put me I got in a kayak and guy paddled me back downstream with me and an eagle looking at each other for a mile and a half down the stream. I'm like, and a beak to the cranial vault does not feel good. It's sharp. So anyway, but we got him back, and the cool story is you kind of think about everything that Ted invested in me. We feel like I was able to learn and go, and then you still carry on that element of conservation as we move forward in life. So, but today again, the bald eagle, several hundred nests. We've seen that element of conservation work. When you hear a lot of different people, well, conservation really don't work and everything. Just in my lifetime, I've seen the wood duck come back in huge numbers. I've seen the bald eagle. 25 years ago, if I went and talked to a class and I said, all right, who in our county or in northwest or northeastern Georgia has ever physically put eyes on a bald eagle? I might as well be the Bigfoot guy in here telling you about Bigfoot, right? Yeah. Because you might have, but it just doesn't. It wasn't a thing, right? They just wasn't here. And I asked that same question, and I'll ask you, how many have you actually physically seen a bald eagle in the state of Georgia?
Oh, the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the entire group. That's happened in 50 years. So as we talk about all the different things we talk about in today's world, about the doom and gloom, we got this, we're faced with this, we're faced with that, we're faced with this, we got all these different things in the environmental world that we deal with. It still tells me to this day, conservation will work. But it goes back to those three little qualities. You got to have leadership, you got to have stewardship that works hard to protect it, right? And then we hope we do enough to have that legacy passed on and it continue, right? The American bald eagle was incredibly good. I have been very blessed to work with all different animals in our state, bobwhite quail, wild turkeys, trapped all kinds of turkeys and moved them around throughout the year and been blessed to do that. But to watch that bald eagle return, I remember the exact place I was standing and the exact place I was almost the time of day when I put eyes on the first bald eagle in Floyd County. That's where I live, in Floyd County, north end of Floyd County. I remember it was 1995, the first bird I ever seen, wild bird flying. So, and I know somebody mentioned you've got one that visits your guys' lake here. If it's between September and February, it's probably a nest in the general vicinity, right? Probably nesting somewhere close by. Biology of the bald eagle, 98% fish. Fish, right? They will eat other things based on availability, but their first choice is always fish. The golden eagle, a lot different, more like a red-tailed hawk. Sarah had a great picture of kind of the differences between the two, because a lot of people will think that juvenile bald eagle is a... Oh, okay. But we could probably go back to that, couldn't we? That picture, we had the two eagles, maybe. There's a pretty quick deal where you can kind of know right off the bat. It's the easiest way to identify a difference between a golden eagle and a bald eagle, and it's their feet. The bald eagle is going to have the feathers that stop pretty up high, and you're going to see the big white or big yellow doppy feet. Golden eagles is more like a gray horned owl. It comes all the way down. The feathers they cover that foot. So even in flight, you can kind of see. The other thing in flight is a lot of times you can look up, and even at 1,000 feet, I say, God, that's an eagle up there. There's no way you can see that. But you're looking at the wing signature, right? Those, if you look up that high, 300, 500, even 1,000 feet up in a thermal, an eagle, it's a broad-winged bird, right? It's almost his body and almost wings forward. From here out is straight. Anything else has got that wrist bone, right? You'll see it crooked back, like if you look up and it's a turkey vulture or an osprey. The wing goes out and it's got that heavy creak and it goes down. It's got that midway wrist point. I guess that could be the wrist, couldn't it? Sure. Yep. Yeah. So see, you can see kind of the golden there. Even as juvenile birds, you can kind of see the difference of how that feather pattern comes all the way down here to the foot, which the balls are right there. So sometimes we do get excited when we see the golden, but most of the time, if people are not very familiar with the golden eagles, they're seeing usually a juvenile bald. But it's all brown and marbly, but they're so big, they think it may be a golden. But we do have some goldens here, not as many, but we're hoping that suit follows. The bald eagle continues to go, and then the golden eagle comes right behind it. I've only seen a golden eagle once in our county. Saw him a couple of times, and it was 100% golden eagle. So we'll see. Does anybody have any questions about? It can be about the eagle. It can be maybe something else. We can kind of stay focused on the eagle. Yes.
Yeah. Now you said the mothers don't take care of the second egg. What did they? I mean, has that been throughout history, or is this something recent?
It is. No. So now, I'm glad you brought that up. Now we've seen a big shift, right? When eagles were coming back from DDT and all the things that they were plagued with, they were concentrating on raising that first young. We've seen a shift in that now because the overall health of those birds are a lot better. They're able to support two, right? So now we're starting to see sometimes if 2 or 3 are born, they're hunting enough, their bodies are healthy enough that they're supporting the 2, right? So we've seen a shift in that in a positive way.
So it was bad kind of during the DDT years that they would kind of neglect the second.
That's correct. Yep. And that's where the idea of where they could come and take that other one with that mortality. So no. In fact, a lot of like the surveys and things have really cooled off a little bit because it's moved on to other things. The eagle population, for a long time, we worked extensively on wild turkeys because we just didn't have many in Georgia. And then in the late 90s and the early part of 2000s, now we got them everywhere, right? There's still, we see a decline sometimes and a fluctuation, but we're still seeing health. And then of course the same thing happened with the bald eagle. And now with the numbers as good as they are, there's surveys and those things are being done. But as far as hacking out those birds, it's just kind of like, okay, with money and resources, what do we do now? This thing's making a bounce back, so where do we go now?
I used to live in St. Louis, Missouri, and the eagles come down the Mississippi River.
Sure.
And during the winter, they fish at the locks and dams.
Oh yeah.
And they're like robins. There's just so many of them. It's wonderful to see. It's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a question about the Berry College eagles.
Sure.
There was issues a few years ago, and I have not followed recently. Where are we with?
That nest site cooled off a little bit. The mother, if you remember, the original mother had a leg injury. Not exactly sure what happened to her. We don't know. She was coming back different things, but different times. But she's kind of moved on a little bit. And we do have a nesting pair that are back in the area. Did they raise last year?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they had 2.
They had 2.
That's right.
And I think they're actually on the 3rd female.
Yeah.
I think it's still the original male, but they are on the 3rd female.
Yeah.
In that nest out here.
Yeah. If you're feeling very romantic about they mate for life.
Well, that's very nice.
Yeah, but if one of them has a lame foot or a hurt foot or something like that, sometimes we go from a station wagon to a Ferrari, and it happens. Yes.
So if you don't have the resources, or this is my voice, for the Eagles, I mean, because they're doing okay, what are you putting those resources in now?
Boy, I tell you what, that's a great question. Well, she was talking about if the bald eagle population is well and as good as it's doing, and there's resources still available, what do we move on to from here? Correct. A quick answer to that: there's always something. One of the biggest things I think right now that the state is trying to wrap their brain around, and there's a huge push for bobwhite quail, bobwhite quail habitat, because again, the easiest answer to why bobwhite quail's gone, that's our state game bird, right? And it was like the king of the forest in South Georgia for many, many years, the bobwhite quail, as a game species. So the easy thing to say is habitat loss, right? But part of that is habitat loss, but probably managing. One of the biggest things for quail is, who's our warm season native grass person in here? Who's our native grass? Yep. Biggest thing for ground nesting birds is habitat and native grasses. And it's all revolves around clump growth. You know, if you look at native grass, right, sagebrush, little blue stem, big blue stem, all these, it's all clumped growth grasses, right? It's all in a clump, and it's like a canopy underneath all those things. And it's native grass. It's what we have here. It's what we're supposed to have here. Well, when we do different things, where we have things like fescue and clover, those birds can't freely move and race through them. They're more susceptible for hawks and things like that. So the native grasses are huge for bobwhite quail, because we've seen that decline. That's a game species that we're able to hunt and go after and so forth and manage. Different wildlife programs now, if you get on like the non-game side of things, like bald eagles and so forth, those programs are still in existence, but they may not be as aggressive as they once were, right? I mean, they still monitor the nest, they still fly the nest several times a year, they're still working to those things. I don't have my thumb on the pulse as much as I used to, because I'm in that education realm of what's going on field biology. But I know right now there's a lot of work being done still with non-game species. When you think about indigo snakes in South Georgia, gopher tortoises that are still on the threatened species list, and all these other things. Unfortunately, I wished I could tell you nothing. We got great funds, we got great resources. There's nothing out there that's compromised. We can just keep adding to what we have. But unfortunately, that's never going to be realistic. You know, we're always going to have something, hopefully, to work for. Water quality, fisheries, all those different things.
There's a place down in South Georgia where chickens were used to bring eagles, and you could go down there and photograph them.
Really? Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, it could be. There's a bunch of information right now about different avian flu getting transmitted to eagles, perhaps, as they feed. So there's a lot of different things out there now about what do eagles face now. Fishing line is a huge one. You know, I don't know if many of us have gone fishing unfortunately, I've been in a pristine trout stream and picked up a whole ball of monofilament fishing line where somebody's broke off and they just left it there. So fishing line's a huge problem. And then, of course, I read an article just a couple weeks ago on the Department of Agriculture in reference to eagles and that avian flu and if it's passed or whatever. So I'm not real familiar with the whole chicken thing and taking your picture, but yeah. I tell you, one of the biggest feeding areas that's really cool is hydroelectric plants, because if you think about Carter's over here, Rocky Mountain, the hydroelectric plant, north end of our county, we got to see a lot of eagles there because of the fluctuation of the water, right? So a lot of times when the water would fluctuate on the hydroelectric plants for those reservoirs, it would trap different size fish and minnows in different ponds and places, and it made an incredible hunting ground for eagles. Essentially almost fish in a barrel, right? So we got to see that as well. Yes, ma'am.
The native grasses that I have available, they also support ground nesting songbirds that we have here in Bent Tree. My goal is 5 people this month to put native grasses and place stilt grass. So one of that 5. Email Bent Tree, the Lake of Wildlife email, and the chipping sparrows, they're just tiny, diminutive birds. They will go to that native grass in spring and summer, and you'll be helping Bent Tree.
Well, if you want to do something very simple for conservation, even if you're inside cooking, you got a frying pan, you see a hog in your yard, go get him. Just wear him out. Just wear him out. Doesn't matter if it's a frying pan, doesn't matter, car. The other thing I'd say also too is doing what you guys are doing. It really is refreshing. I mean, it's I was blown away, and I was so glad that, was it Mason that called? Yeah. That called, and I said, oh God, Bent Tree, heck yeah, we'll go back. Because when I left here last year, or whenever we had the snake, stop telling people it's a snake handling deal. That's going to be like, so it's a snake handler guy. No, but no, joking. But I was blown away last year, and yet again, all the different things that you guys do are involved in is truly remarkable. Me and Sarah was sitting there, and I looked at her and I was like, man, these folks are great. I mean, they're just, and it doesn't take a lot. It's just a little bit of those warm season grasses, different things that make a huge impact, later on. I tell people all the time, if you want to manage for one species, manage for bobwhite quail. Because when you manage for bobwhite quail, you don't realize it, but you are managing for deer, turkey, ground nesting birds, songbirds, all the different things. Because when you look at quail ground, you look at the opened canopy, timber stands, warm season native grasses, prescribed fire. You won't find a person on this planet, maybe, that is not a bigger proponent for prescribed fire. Don't like wildfire, prescribed fire. Fire is an amazing tool for wildlife. But any other questions?
Yeah, what's all that stuff lying around?
Oh man, I'm glad you asked. Okay, so there was, when we talk about the Berry College nest, there was a short window with the ornithologist there, Dr. Carlton, that there was a big conversation about potentially banding some of those birds at Berry. However, as we talked about it, it's like, okay, so what are we trying to achieve? There's always a chance going to that nest might mess the eagles up completely by banding those birds. So other than just fun information, what biological data are we going to gain from putting a wing patch and a leg band on those birds? Other than if we find that bird later, we're going to know how far it traveled. Oh, that's cool, whatever. But what are we going to gain from that? And we really didn't have a good answer. So the decision was made to leave them alone, let them do what they're going to do. But during the one of the camera visits out there, when they're maintaining the camera, I was able to kind of go and check out some things with Dr. Carlton. And these bones were out of that berry nest, right? They were. We picked them right up, and they were all in the bottom of that nest at berry, right? So you can see spikes from a catfish. You can see the top crown of a catfish's head, and the back is where his vertebrae started. So you can see that. Those eagles will do kind of like there's a skull of a duck, probably a goose, right? So you see different things in the nest that they're consuming and bringing back to the nest. We did see those berry eagles do some things a little bit different because of availability. Fish is a big thing. Garden Lakes is just southwest of that nest site, so it's a relatively shallow lake, so there was a lot of fish and honey. They spent a lot of time there, but there's so many squirrels and things at Berry. We saw their diet shift a little bit because of availability. They had just food available, so their diet shifted just a little bit. That was somewhat uncharacteristic of a bald eagle because because of availability. It's like, why leave and go fly over here when I got a squirrel barking at me right there? You know, so that we've seen that kind of shift and die a little bit. But all those bones were collected in that nest, and then people lost their mind because there was a cat that brought back to the deal. I mean, flipped out. I mean, so all of a sudden you could see who were cat people and who were eagle people, because they were. I mean, and it's like, what are you going to do to that eagle now? And I'm like, well, tell him not to eat cats. I don't know. I mean, what? I don't know. So there was brought back to the deal. So I mean, it wasn't my wife's cat, so I'm okay. But anyway. We decided not to tag those birds or put leg bands on them, but they did we do have those bones there with us. And if you ever make it down to Rome, Georgia, please come, Rome-Floyd Eco Center. You can look it up on site. We serve about 20,000 school kids a year with field trips and different programs that are tailored to whatever they've got going on in the classroom. Yes?
Did the PFAs, those forever chemicals, when they came out from the carpet manufacturing, was that something that concerned your center? Is that something you were looking at as a potential pollutant for the eagles?
Not necessarily for the eagles, because it takes so long for the effects of that. And I think with the eagles' lifespan as being a lot shorter than humans, in theory, that's just not been a thing. Those forever chemicals are. I would be more concerned with the ingestion of fish, not necessarily with the PFAS, but lead contaminants, any other kind of different things that they may be picking up that could be a bacterial, problem versus a chemical-based issue with pollutants. But yes, it's definitely on our radar. But I think it's relatively so new. Not exactly sure what the effects of all that's going to be and how it's affected wildlife. But a lot of times we think all of our aquatic species, especially if it's going to show up impactful, usually it's going to affect amphibians first, right? Anything that's in the water is absorbing stuff through their skin. I'd be real interested to see what frogs and salamanders and things like that, what kind of PFAS are in that tissue or in that animal, before I would start branching out to other things. So yes.
You talked a lot about conservation and touched a little bit on the hogs and control. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking Canada geese were crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe not here, but Savannah is terrible.
Yeah.
And coyotes, I don't know whether they're on the radar. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we've got somewhat of some relief on the coyotes because they're not regulated. You can hunt them, you can shoot them, you can trap them, you can do all these different things with coyotes. They're kind of on that nuisance species list, like beavers and some other animals, that they're prolific and they can control them. With that, we do enjoy a little bit. There is a mechanism in place for the Canada goose problem. You can legally get a permit from Georgia DNR. You don't have to go through the feds. You can actually do it at the state level if they're, for example, on a golf course, damaging a golf course because there's so many, or there's so many on a lake, and they're just, we had an issue in Rome where there was so many on one lake that the fecal chloroforms was going through the roof, but there were 70 geese there. So they said, okay, we're going to give you a permit to do whatever. If you want to harvest them legally, if you want to scramble their eggs, you can do that. And what I mean by that is sometimes during the nesting season, if they're nesting in different places, you can pick the eggs up and shake them and put them back. The mom will continue to nest and set on them, but they're not viable eggs anymore. Because if you destroy the nest and take the eggs or bust the eggs, she'll just go re-nest. So she'll do that. So there are mechanisms in place when it becomes an issue. Most definitely on airport property. Airports, U.S. Fish and Wildlife will issue permits on airport property to help harvest some of the Canada geese. So there's mechanisms in place. We send 30 heads to University of Georgia every year. to test. Years ago, what happened is eagles were eating coots, and whatever the bacteria from algae that was in the coots, nobody cared much when it was a coot. But when eagles started to have the same issues and symptoms that the coots had, acting crazy and bouncing around, all this different stuff, that bacteria was going in, causes brain lesions in bald eagles and coots. It was getting passed through ingestion, and the bald eagles were showing up with it. So there was a huge, and eating Canada goose, the same kind of thing. We saw that bacteria, but whatever it was, that bacteria was very short-lived. We don't see that anymore. So whatever they were consuming and eating, it was kind of a short-lived deal. We're just not seeing that anymore. But we still, I just don't go out and say, okay, I'm going to pick a spot and go collect 30 geese. And somebody asked me one time, are you killing them? And I'm like, well, I can't send the head to UGA if I don't put the goose down. And that's where I go back and talk about how some of the stuff that we do is not very pretty, right? I can't tell you how many fawns that we harvested at Berry College to feed the eagles, right? Because they've got to have organ tissue, they got to have hair, they got to have bone, so they're trimming. We're not having to go in and trim their nails or their beaks. They're doing that automatic. So sometimes it's not fun to go through a place and put down a fawn or a small deer or something like that. But the whole deal about being an ecologist is, at some point in time, your kind was part of the problem. And I'm a little more angry of my ancestors because we wasn't conservation minded. The effects of that now is I'm having to go out and I'm having to put fawns down to feed our eagles because it was bad. But you got to understand, and boy, I tell you, some animal rights folks blister me on this, but it's like you've got a surplus of one animal. You got a surplus. You've got more deer in the state of Georgia than we can harvest every year, right? And that's a whole other separate issue. That now we see EHD and disease and starvation starting to control that population. I'd much rather put an animal down than watch it starve to death, right? That's a pretty arrogant statement, because who am I to pick and choose? I get that. But at the same time, if you're going to work hard to save an animal that's on a threatened species list, go get the surplus. And that's kind of the whole mindset. Is it fun? No, it's not. But when you start talking about conservation and ecology, it's sometimes some of those necessary evils that I tell people, that, especially young people that are getting into this profession, everything you do in wildlife management is not pretty. Sometimes things have to happen that are not pretty. But you gotta just understand what the goal is, what the greater good, and that whole deal of stewardship and what you're trying to achieve. And how you get past that is sound data, right? Sound data, just not working for an entity, but trying to work for the betterment of conservation. So, anything else? Again, man, I always enjoy talking to Bent Creek. You guys are great. I appreciate what you do. If you come to Rome, Georgia, come by the Eco Center. We got a little kitchen in there, and I'll even buy you a cup of coffee. You walk around. All right. So thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Before you go, Ben, could you explain to them, as you talked to me earlier, about what happens when the eagles die and how that happens?
We were talking about this, and of course this is a replica because it's easier for us to get. It's easier, believe it or not, permit-wise, it is easier for us to obtain a live eagle than a dead one. And what I mean by that is, if we built a facility, a mew, we call it a hawk mew or an eagle mew, and we had a non-releasable. We had a bird that was hit, had a broke wing or a bad eye that couldn't go back into the wild, right? It's easier for us to get permits to obtain that bird and use it for education than it is a dead one, to have a mounted bird for education. What happens when an eagle dies in captivity, whether it's a golden eagle or a bald eagle, Dollywood, some of these other places, if they lose a bird, or one is found in the wild. That bird, by law, goes to Arizona to a repository that U.S. Fish and Wildlife have. It's a complete workup. There's a complete autopsy and necropsy of that bird, brain tissue, everything, because we're still learning. Even though we've got plenty of birds, we're still learning from our past mistakes. So all those, that animal, that eagle is sent there to the repository in Arizona. From that point, whatever's left, feathers, talons, beaks, all those things, there's well over hundreds of tribal councils of Native Americans throughout the United States, right? Those items are offered to the tribal councils, okay? They get first choice. So if they want those feathers for ceremonial purposes or religious ceremonies, whatever they may be, they have basically first option to take the feathers or take whatever of that animal to use for that. So when that happens, whatever is left over, it usually never happens. There's just not a lot of mounts or eagles that pass away from natural causes or whatever. There's by the time you go through those tribal councils, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, say, okay, we've got funding. We would love to mount a golden eagle and put him in here. It's just tough to get, right? They're just tough to get. So that's why I say sometimes having a live one's easier is what happens. But I think that's kind of a neat deal that they do that. And I got kind of sidetracked with some of your question. Hogs, same thing, kill them anytime, all the time. Other than deer, that's the only thing you can legally bait. You can put out bait, bring them in. Killing them and hunting them is tough. Trapping them is about the way to go. Once you get them hooked on bait, you got them. And then you can bait them in, then trap them with a drop net. There's a bunch of commercial stuff, and then get rid of them. But okay, good. All right. Yep. Thank you, guys. Of course. Yes, of course. Yep. That'll be great.
Okay, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'll see you again next month, and look forward to it. September is turtles.